Nonstop by Brian Aldiss, copyright 1958, is a science fiction novel that follows a primitive tribe of humans living on this enormous, sprawling starship. They don't necessarily know that they are on a starship, although some people in the tribe have kind of theorized that. But a lot of them, because they're kind of hunter-gatherers, they don't really care all that much about the nature of their world for the most part. And they are moving through these enormous hallways of this starship by kind of shifting a barrier at the front of their camp and simultaneously shifting the rear barrier along. And Brian Aldiss describes this as them inching their way through the starship like a worm through a giant apple, or something along those lines, which I thought was really great. And we follow a man named Roy Complain, who is a hunter who ventures outside of the bounds of these barriers to hunt for animals that are living throughout the ship, which has been basically taken over almost in its entirety by these stalk-like plants that they refer to as ponics, which have sprouted up in enormous quantity, forming a kind of forest all throughout the ship. And these plants are incredibly fast growing, so whenever they're cut down and clearances are made, within a day or so they've already regrown in the place of the ones that were cut down. Throughout the ship, the tribe find the skeletal remains of a race that they refer to as the Giants, who they have basically accepted as the creators of this ship or this world, and they have left behind a lot of artifacts and texts and objects which are recovered and salvaged and traded between the tribes. It's said that throughout the ship there are a number of really dangerous entities, from mutants to something called the Outsiders, which are not considered human, although they appear as human, wild animals, and also other tribes. One of these tribes is referred to as the Forwards, or the Forwards people, and they are said to be a much more civilized culture than the people living in this tribe, which are referred to as the Quarters. And so we've got a priest character who is in the tribe who has stumbled across a log from one of these deceased giants, which is making reference to a captain of the ship. So in his mind, the theory that they are on a giant starship is confirmed, and there seems to be the presence of a captain. And so this priest devises a plan to put together a small group of like-minded people, travel across the starship to find this captain, overthrow him, and take control of the world. And our main character, Roy Complain, is drafted into this small group of 3 or 4 individuals that go out on this epic journey through these ponic forests throughout the starship. And I'm not going to say much more about what they encounter, because I think one of the really great things about this book is that it feels like there is mystery around every corner, and the revelations keep coming, and they are always satisfying right to the very end. And not only is this adventure and mystery really strong, but the writing and the characters are also great and memorable. With Aldiss doing his best to seed little clues and hints and nods to the actual nature of events that are going on before those reveals come, which in a way reminded me of The Inverted World by Christopher Priest. And the way in which the cultures have developed on this starship is really well thought out in a way that constantly makes you think, or consider in more detail, or even laugh at times. So I think that Nonstop by Brian Aldiss is incredible. I've read one of his other books in the past, which is Hot House, and I do think that that book has incredible world building and ideas, but I don't think they come together in such a focused way that they do here in Nonstop. So I love this book, and it's one of the best ones I've read this year. The City and the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke, copyright 1956. I've got this nice Corgi SF Collector's Library edition here, which is actually a little bit grubby, but I'm sure I could clean that up if I wanted to. This book is set in the last city on Earth called Diaspar or Diaspar, and it is entirely self-contained within a glass dome, surrounded in all directions by desert as far as the eye can see. Earth has crumbled and decayed, and there's nothing left outside of the city aside from this barren wasteland. This city is governed by a central computer which generates the layout of the city and changes it constantly over time. And the interesting thing about Diaspar is that all of its residents are essentially created by the central computer from these genetic memory banks. And when these people reach a certain age, they start to recall the memories from all of their previous lives. And this city has been in operation now for 1 billion years, where people are almost immortal and they can go back into that machine to be recycled and born again as a new person. We follow a main character named Alvin, who is interesting because he is one of only 14 people ever to seemingly be an entirely new person constructed from scratch by the central computer. Which means that he is slightly different to everyone else because he doesn't have these ancestral memories to draw from. And most fundamentally, he doesn't possess the innate fear that all of the other residents have for the outside world. This is supposedly because at some point in humanity's history, they had control over the stars. They had a galactic empire and were forced back to Earth by a mysterious group of beings known as the Invaders. And this city on Earth is all that remains of humanity. So the other residents of the city are so scared by the concept of the outside world that they won't even approach the boundary wall, and they are overcome by fear if they are to look out upon this desert. But Alvin, our main character, does not have this fear. In fact, he has a curiosity to explore the world beyond Diaspar and understand the true nature of the world. So much so that the people in Diaspar engage in these virtual reality simulation games that you can play with other people, and he is always trying to push the boundaries of these virtual worlds, which are all generated with some kind of boundary wall, whether that be a range of mountains or a cave wall or some other structure that keeps them within the limits of this virtual world. And Alvin's always trying to push the boundaries of that as well. So at some point he tries to figure out a way to leave the city, which there is seemingly no obvious way to do, until he meets a character who I think is called Kedron, who describes himself as a jester, who is someone that the central computer will conjure up every now and then in order to inject some chaos into the world to prevent human civilization from stagnating in this utopian society. And again, I think in a similar way to Nonstop, I probably shouldn't say any more than that because the story centres around what is outside of the limits of the walls of the city, if anything. What's the actual true nature of the world? And it's quite entertaining to go on that journey. I think Arthur C. Clarke is an author that I really like, but a lot of people will say that his writing is dry or boring or dull. I don't necessarily agree with that assessment, but certainly some of his works can be a bit technical in terms of what they're exploring. I've read 3 other Arthur C. Clarke books before this: Childhood's End, 2001, A Space Odyssey, and Rendezvous with Rama. And I think that The City and the Stars is my least favourite one, but it is the most colourful and the most kaleidoscopic in terms of the ideas that it's exploring. In a way, it feels a little bit like a mosaic where all of these different pieces that are the ideas on display here come together to form a coherent image. but everything's a little bit wonky. It doesn't come together in a truly cohesive way, in my opinion. But I still had a good time reading it, and it certainly presents a much more hopeful message for humanity than Nonstop does. So that's the two books that I've read recently, both kind of similar in their themes of humanity encased in a confined world, trying to understand the true nature of it. Both of those books feature in this book, Science Fiction, The 100 Best Novels by David Pringle. And if you watch my last video, you'll know that I am doing a challenge to read all 100 of these books. Both of these are in there, and I think so far, so good, because I enjoyed both of them. I think Nonstop is the better of the two, and one of my favourite books of the year. But I still think that The City and the Stars is worth reading, especially if you are a fan of some of those other Arthur C. Clarke works. So that's all for today. Thank you very much for watching, liking and subscribing. I just hit 500 subscribers, so I'm extremely grateful for that. And if you're not subscribed already, please do, because there is plenty more to come. Thank you, and I'll see you on the next one.